Welcome to the third and final episode of the 10 Conversations Leaders Need to Be Having and Sharing PodCLASS. Now, in this final episode, we are going to talk about the steps you can take to make those conversations that we discussed in episode 2 happen. The ways you can have and share those conversations. So we're going to take you through a series of steps that you can follow, and we're going to start with step 1, which is all about prioritizing. So basically what we would say is, as a very first step, you need to prioritize those conversations that we recommended by just aligning them with your current development needs. So look at your current leader development needs and objectives, and then look at the potential outcomes for each of those conversations, which we outlined when we went through those, and then marry those two together and prioritize those conversations. And once you do that, develop what we would call a conversation calendar, which is essentially a roadmap that outlines the conversations that you as a leader or the leaders at your company, if you're in leader development, are going to have over, say, the next 6 to 12 months. And look, we realize that this calendar is most likely going to get adjusted or tweaked along the way, but we find that developing this calendar, this roadmap, actually puts some needed rigor and rationale and urgency around having these necessary conversations. So you want to develop this calendar just to put that rigor around it and make sure that you're going to have those conversations. Of course, then as a next step, you're going to start digging into some of the details. And so take those conversations from your calendar and start rounding out the details for each one. Things like, well, what format are we going to use? Who is the audience that this is for? Because remember, you're going to be sharing most of these conversations. What's the leader's role? Is the leader going to interview people? Is the leader going to get interviewed? Is the leader going to be the teacher? Is the leader going to be the student? Outline needed resources, execution details, even after the fact sharing strategies. How do you plan to share this? Now, we mentioned here the format you envision. I do want to talk a bit about that, because the great news here is you have a lot of options to choose from when it comes to which formats to use to have and share the conversations that you've prioritized. You even have the flexibility to use different formats for different conversations. And look, we realize that you probably have a group or a team or maybe even an agency that can help you figure out which approach to use for the conversations that you prioritize. But we do want to quickly highlight some of those formats, just highlight some of those options for you. The first one is fireside chats. You can hold fireside chats that select audiences can attend, and those can even be recorded and then shared after the fact. You can take some of those conversations and have them via webinars or conference calls, in which virtual attendees attend those calls or those webinars, and then those can be recorded and those can be shared and released. You can have some of those conversations as part of a lunch and learn session, or even a lunch and learn series where employees and teams attend. You could even have private conversations and then share the insights and the highlights with select audiences, maybe via newsletters or town halls for employees, or even social posts for the broader business community. So you have a lot of options for formats, for ways to have and share those conversations. But there's one more format that we would highly recommend, and that's podcasts. I mean, we're big believers in the fact that podcasts are probably one of the most effective formats for business leaders to use for thought leadership and for knowledge sharing, for developing necessary leadership skills and qualities, especially the ones that we've been discussing, and of course, for having and sharing the conversations that we outlined and we recommended. And we want to take you through a few reasons why podcasts are so effective. The first is the depth of conversation. I mean, the podcast format, it frees leaders from the limitations of short form content like articles or social media posts, and it allows them to have unhurried conversations where they can methodically surround topics and deeply explore complex ideas. The format also gives them the opportunity to comprehensively share insights and present their expertise and their experiences, which is ultimately going to position them as authorities in their respective fields. So the depth of conversation is one of the big benefits of podcasts. There's also the human connection. We've been talking throughout all these episodes about the importance of how today's leaders need to be authentic and vulnerable and real. They need to be human. And the good news is the relaxed and casual and conversational style of the podcast medium can help humanize leaders and even help ensure that they develop and showcase those necessary qualities and characteristics. There's also the convenience of podcasts. I mean, they're highly accessible. You can listen while you're commuting, exercising, doing other tasks, and that flexibility ensures that a leader's message can seamlessly integrate into the audience's daily routines, which is important. And then there's familiarity. I mean, an overwhelming number of business professionals already use podcasts to get informed, to get smart, and even to get inspired. So if you use podcasts for the conversations that you prioritize, you're going to be delivering information in a format that already aligns with their consumption preferences, which is going to help ensure that your messages reach them in a relevant and an engaging way. There's also storytelling. I mean, podcasts are arguably one of the most effective storytelling platforms available, and it can give leaders the opportunity to share compelling narratives around their insights and their approaches, as well as around their company's history and culture and purpose and more. So great storytelling format as well. And then there's flexibility. I mean, podcasts have the flexibility to be released publicly or privately. I mean, my company, we do a lot of private podcasts for companies. A lot of people don't realize that you can release podcasts to select audiences like employees or candidates or customers. So you can effectively engage and impact whichever audience you're targeting using podcasts. There's also what we would call the draw-in factor. I mean, look, content filmed in a podcast setting, it immediately draws in viewers, especially in the business community, because it's one that is synonymous with thought leadership. Just think of how many times you're scrolling through or looking at LinkedIn, you see somebody in that podcast setting. That is a setting where you stop and you click and you watch that conversation. And let's face it, I mean, while fireside chats and conference calls and webinars and lunch and learns are all fine, they simply aren't as current as podcasts, and they don't grab people's attention the way a podcast setting does. So it has that draw-in factor. There's also snackability. I mean, podcasts can easily be edited into snackable content assets that can be leveraged and shared in countless ways. And the good news is business professionals also engage regularly with snackable information. So you can pull clips. If you do those in-depth, unhurried, long-form conversations like we just talked about, you can actually pull clips from those podcasts and share them across company or even leader social channels to reach relevant audiences. So snackability is another big benefit of podcasts. And then there's also this. Podcasting itself is an incredibly effective way to build and hone a lot of crucial leadership skills and qualities, especially ones that we've been talking about, like communication, time management, listening, adaptability, authenticity, networking, storytelling, moving on from failure. The list goes on and on. You cannot do a podcast without developing and honing and building all of those skills. They are built into doing a podcast. And that's why we encourage every leader and future leader that we meet to launch a podcast. We even say to them, don't worry about how many listeners you get or how many downloads. Do it simply for your own professional development and for skill building, because all of those skills are organically built into doing a podcast. And don't stress about this. If you've never recorded a podcast before, it's not nearly as complicated as and maybe as intimidating as you might think. I mean, the fact is, all you really need is a quiet, well-appointed setting with a table and some chairs and a couple of microphones and a computer with some user-friendly recording software. And if you need some resources, we can send some videos and articles, even our recommendations for equipment and recording software your way. Just let us know. And building on that, we can also help. If you need some help, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can get involved and help you. We could be a helpline for you and make ourselves available for, say, one-off consulting calls to help you prioritize those conversations or help you dig into those details that we discussed to round out those conversations. We could even give you a PodCLASS or a podcast 101 if you want to learn more just about the podcasting format, from developing shows to the best way to enlist guests, to getting equipment, to production recommendations. So if you need that, we can be your helpline. We could even get a little bit more involved, maybe provide you with ideas like custom podcast show concepts and even turnkey tools like scripts and guest recommendations, just to make it easier for you to activate those conversations that you end up prioritizing. And we could also just do all the heavy lifting and fully develop approaches that are going to give you the opportunity to have and share the conversations that you need to be having and sharing. We're here if you need us. So I guess what I would say here is it's probably time for me to stop talking and for you to start talking. So thank you so much. I hope this was informative and inspiring, and it does motivate you to have more conversations more regularly. Like I said, we're here if you need us. Just get in touch. And I'm going to leave you with a quote, one of my favorite quotes, which I think brings a lot of this to life and really is the essence of what we've been talking about here across these 3 episodes. And it's from Linda Lambert, who had said, "One good conversation can shift the direction of change forever." Thanks so much.